Hello, I'm Sean Lim, and welcome to After 10. As we close out the year, key economic indicators suggest that recovery will continue in 2014. But what should the Korean economy do to respond to policies like the U.S. Fed's bond tapering program? On today's After 10, we look at what the research says about the economic recovery ahead. Stay with us. Well, Dr. Kim, thanks so much for joining us on After 10.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, I understand as president of the Korea Economic Association, you have your organization for decades has brought research and academic knowledge to the Korean economy. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, first of all, our Korean Economic Association was founded in 1952. It was, during the Korean War period. Currently, KEA has more than 2,500 members, and they are mostly professors and professional economists. And we publish two journals. One is published in English, and another published in Korean. And we also organize international as well as local conferences. And now we are preparing for a huge joint conference coming in February next year.
And I understand that the focus for the conference and pretty much the focus of all these academic minds is how to bring the Korean economy to this next wave of growth under a new paradigm.
Currently, there are about 55 specialized economic societies, and they deal with many different subjects and themes. The grand theme of the joint conference coming in February is going to be the change in paradigm to seek a retake off for the Korean economy.
Well, speaking of the Korean economy, in 2014, the Korean Central Bank, Statistics Korea, have said that the data suggests we're going to continue on a recovery path. Are you as optimistic?
Well, I kind of agree that Korea is kind of recovering in the sense that last year, in 2012, its growth rate was only 2%. Now there's consensus that for this year, in the past 2013, its growth rate is going to be 2.9%. And therefore, next year, a lot of forecasting agencies, and including the international organization, they project that the GDP for next year is going to be between 3.5 and 3.9%. So on that basis, I can say that Korea is entering into a recovery period.
Well, a lot of economists would say in this environment, a 3 to 4% growth rate is actually quite admirable, or some countries may even be envious of it. Mm-hmm. But you've actually stated before that the potential growth rate here in Korea is actually around 7%. Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, I did not say exactly. 7% is going to be the potential growth rate. But historically, Korea achieved a high growth in 7.5% from 1962 until right before 1997 Asian currency crisis. Now, after the currency crisis, Korea's GDP growth fell down to 4.7%. And then, after the 2008 global financial crisis, it fell down even to 2%, 3.2% level. And now this is the historical fact. Now, a lot of people in the world recognize Korea being an IT power country. And so many businesses extensively use web technologies, and the number of internet users in Korea is countless. And the internet use has transformed the way we live and the way we work and the way we socialize and meet. And on this basis, obviously business productivity and the labor productivity must have gone up very high. Now, without the use of internet, say 15 or 20 years ago, Korea achieved 7 or 8% GDP growth. But now with the use of internet, Korea has experienced only 2 or 3% GDP growth. This is too low. That's why I say that current GDP growth is way below its true potential growth.
Well, even if we're in this recovery phase, a lot of businesses and even individuals, they say they don't really feel it. Is there a lag factor, or are there other constraints upon people actually seeing this growth in their regular daily lives or in business operations?
All right. For this past year, GDP growth is going to be 2.9%. And behind this a bit low growth rate is very good performance in exports. Now, speaking of Korea's exports, only 4 major big large companies account for most of the GDP growth or in export share. For example, Samsung's mobile phones and LG's and electronic appliances and Hyundai's, passenger cars and SK's, petrochemicals and, mobiles and other IT products account for most of the export products. Large companies, been doing, really good job, but most of other companies in Korea, been barely surviving. That's why, most of the individuals do not feel that kind of, thing. Economy is recovering, so that's the
situation. So the numbers show a recovery,
yes.
But it's concentrated in a few number of companies and thereby a few number of employees.
Yeah, but the growth rate per se is still low.
Right.
Yeah.
And we also mentioned before that the social fairness and trust in government, society, businesses also affect growth. Those seem to be a little bit more intangible. Can you tell us how they actually have a real effect on the economy?
When the country was, heavily hit by the Asian currency crisis, so many people lost their job, and so many people, just had to tolerate, low income and the low consumption. And the business people just, they went bankrupt, not for good reasons. So they began to have, or they lose confidence in the government policies, and they, lost their confidence in investment or in the future economic, situation or environment. And that way they began to lose, confidence or trust. So Korean economy is now suffering total, mistrust. The trust between the labor and management has been eroded, and the trust between, say, government and business, and the trust between, say, business to business, and the trust between, say, the people and the politics or politicians, been eroded so much. They don't believe in government policies, truly, and they don't follow the, policy guidance, and they do not, invest as much as they're supposed to. So that way, the investment is going to be, weakened, and the economy is not really going forward.
So
because of so much lack in confidence and trust.
So people don't act if they don't trust, they don't do what they would normally do, or if they do something, they're
fighting. So that makes their expectation of future economy more unstable, uncertain, or risky. So that's why they are reluctant to make a long-term investment.
So to rectify that, how do you go about that? Does a top-down policy change affect that, or is it more of this bottom-up cultural change?
Well, it's not easy, because that kind of thing takes time, for to be corrected. I would say that because of mistrust among the people, they tend to ignore the importance of, fair play, and if they, becoming too much selfish, then the other partners will do the same thing. So on that kind of, basis, the mistrust is building up. So to correct this problem, first of all, they have to agree. The Korean people have to agree on the importance of exercising fair play in every matter, not only in sports, but this is very important. So we all need to agree on the importance of fair play, and then slowly or gradually the mutual trust is going to be restored.
So that's something that everybody can work on individually, but what are some of the external factors that will help to boost the economy here in Korea in 2014?
Well, the external factors affecting Korean economy, one of them is, of course, the recovery of the U.S. economy, because Korean economy depends a lot on the U.S. economy, as well as on Chinese, economic performance, because we export a lot more to China than to the U.S. And as I see it, the U.S. is really, recovering, literally and actually, and China is doing, all right, although they making a readjustment in their GDP growth strategy. And so the external factor is somewhat favorable, to Korea or to the Korean economy. Now, one unfavorable factor is the North Korea's provocative actions. So we always need to be watching out, see the sentiment of the North Korean people and see how they react to the to the world peoples.
So is there a way to introduce something new to solve these issues that hasn't been done before, or should we just continue along with our current game plan?
We can, there are a lot of things we can do better. So as I said earlier, we need to look out and understand what's really going on in the external economy and see what our partner countries are doing and what is going to be the environment or the rule of game in outside Korea. So we need to accommodate those things that if they are, what we need. So, we just become more extroverted, because outward looking forward attitude. So we mingle more with the rest of the world, and we can play, catalytic role in between the low-income country and the high-income country. So that's kind of things that we can do, continue to do, to level up our economy or position.
So after looking back at 2013 and looking at the indicators that we have at the moment for 2014, should we brace ourselves for more tough times, or should we relax a little?
Well, we can't really relax a little bit, because always, the challenges keep on rising, and because it is always important to maintain the fair competition, in every market, and everyone is supposed to do in his or her best, and we need to try to improve technology or science, and we do more of R&Ds and so forth. So there's a lot of things that would keep us busy. We never relax.
So this month we got the big announcement that the U.S. Federal Reserve will start tapering its bond buying program by $10 billion a month starting in January. What effect do you think this will have on the world economy?
Well, it will affect many of the middle-income countries or the newly emerging countries, because even for the newly emerging countries, there are two types of newly emerging countries. One is high crisis risk country, versus low crisis risk country. And as the U.S. is going to reduce the quantitative easing program, a lot of capital outflows will take place from those low risk, high risk, high crisis risk countries. And then their currency value will go down, and their stock market or bond markets will have a problem.
Like what we saw over the summer in Southeast Asia.
Yes. But in part, the effects had been already reflected in the market. And not so much, but still, as capital flows out of those countries to back to the U.S. or even to other low risk or safe countries, including Korea. So that is how the reduction in the QE program is going to affect the rest of the world.
So for Korea, a lot of economists and economic think tanks have said that Korea has the fundamentals to withstand any bond tapering, and that the situation of outflows of capital were on the lower end compared to the other higher risk countries. But how do you think we will see it play out here in Korea in 2014?
Well, first of all, Korea might be affected a little bit, by some outflows. But as capital flows out of the country, there will be some positive effect. That is, the currency value is going to be a bit weaker, and then that is going to be bonus to Korean exporters. But on the other hand, there might be inflows as well, from those countries. So there will be some offsetting. And exchange rate wise, it's going to be somewhat mitigated. We're not going to be affected that much, except that we might have problem with against Japan, because Japan is going to even expand its QE program. So regarding the exports to Japan or to the third world country, we might have a hard time competing with Japan.
Well, the government's safeguard measures have been described as good and sufficient. Which measures do you think should keep us from worrying?
Well, see, everybody has his or her own job to do, and the business people, they should have more confidence in the world economy and the U.S. economy in particular, and they would make more, aggressive investment locally as well as globally. And then people, ordinary people, would, just have confidence so that they increase their consumption, so that, see, overall for Korea, it needs to emphasize the private consumption and exports. Now, what the government can do is to keep the exchange rates stable, and to reduce the the regulations, unnecessary regulations, as much as it can. And at the same time, for Korea, the small and medium enterprises, they can do their job much better if government is doing something for them in terms of deregulating all these things for the small and medium enterprises. Not only that, but the government can provide some assistance or help financially, or in terms of the information provision for the small SMEs. Then the situation is going to be much better.
The region here in East Asia has gone through a lot of challenges this year, but
Right.
looking ahead to 2014, how could you sum up our potential relationships with China, Japan, North Korea on a bilateral status between each country?
I'm not an expert on, the international politics or the geopolitics, but as I see it, the relationship between China, economic relationship in particular, between China and Korea is becoming, is improving more. And the trade relationship, especially between the two countries, is going to be even stronger, and consolidated. So that's very good for us. And that's going to have some impact, favorable impact on North Korea in such a way that the tension on the Korean Peninsula is going to be lessened. Now, the relationship between the U.S. and Korea is steady, and especially in non-economic fields, in the military field, as well as other diplomatic matters. The cooperation between the U.S. and Korea is going to be even more. So overall, the relationships among these four countries, in China, Korea, U.S., North Korea, would be somewhat stable. So that's a good point. Except that the relation between Japan and Korea is a little bit shaky, unstable. So we need to do something to stabilize this thing.
Well, you just recently capped off a long academic career, and you got to interact with a lot of students, the future economists of Korea. Yeah. What questions do you think are going to come up in their practice, as they mature into this new Korean economy?
The thing that I, want to emphasize for them is that economist is an economic doctor. So the economist should be able to cure the economic diseases, inflation or unemployment problem. So while teaching students and doing research work in the university, the professors should be able to provide prescriptions to, practical prescriptions, to all, these economic problems, and especially the prevention of future economic or financial crisis.
And you'll also be passing the torch in your position as president of the Korea Economics Association. What would you give as advice to your successor?
Well, as I look back upon the past days I've been through, realize that I always been living, doing my best, trying to do my best. And it pays. Doing your best eventually pays.
Well, Dr. Kim, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me here.
And that does it for us on After 10. Join us again next time. We'll see you soon.